Good morning to one and all present here. It's a lovely morning, and as rightly said, you don't have to be great to start, but you have to start to be great. I'm Ms. Rohini Shetty. Welcome you all for the international webinar Biofacet, organized by the Department of Microbiology and Biotechnology at Patkar Verde College. I extend a warm welcome to the guest speaker, Dr. Ujjwal Rathore, our CEO, Dr. Mala Kharkar, our principal, Dr. Shrikant Sawant, Chief Coordinator, Ms. Ruchika Gandhi, department staff members, and all our dear participants. I would like to request our principal, Dr. Shrikant Sawant, to address the audience and declare this international webinar open.
Thank you. Good morning to you all. This gives me immense pleasure to welcome you all on the occasion of this international webinar. Department of Microbiology and Biotechnology presents RUSA-sponsored international webinar, Biofacet CRISPR-Gene Editing in Virus Research. And we have eminent resource person, Dr. Ujjwal Rathore, PhD, postdoctoral scientist, Marson Lab, Gladstone, UCSF, Institute of Genomic Immunology, San Francisco, California, USA. This gives me immense pleasure to welcome you all. We know that our Chikitsak Samoha is always encouraging us and offering us platform for such national, international webinars. Honorable President Sri Kishore Rangnekar sir, Dr. Kiran Mangaonkar, Vice President, Dr. Gurunath Pandit, Joint Secretary, Dr. Mala Kharkar, CEO, always encourage us to pursue such activity, to continue such activity. We have eminent team of organizers, Mrs. Ruchita Dalvi, Chief Coordinator, Anupama Tomar, Neha, and organizing team has organized this program. Our Chikitsak Samoha, Sir Sitaram and Lady Shantabai Patkar, College of Arts and Science, and VP Verde College of Commerce and Economics. Our college was founded by Chikitsak Samoha, an association of like-minded individuals who were keenly interested in education. The college was named after Sir Sitaram Patkar, a distinguished judge of Bombay High Court, who was knighted after his retirement, and his wife, Lady Shantabai Patkar. Sir Sitaram was deeply interested in furthering the cause of women's education and was the Vice Chancellor of SNDT University for many years. The College of Arts and Science started functioning from the academic year 1964-65 and the Commerce section from the academic year 1980-81. To provide career-based education, the college started degree-level self-finance courses from the year 2000-2001. Since then, the college has constantly upgraded the courses offered and the infrastructure required for these courses to provide students with best possible learning opportunities. In order to acquire more advanced and better skills and knowledge, the college under autonomy has introduced many job-oriented UG, PG, and diploma programs such as BSc in Hospitality, Catering Services and Tourism, BSc Data Science and Business Analytics, BSc Actuarial Science and Quantitative Finance, Bachelor of Management Studies, Sports, BA Advertising Communication Design, BA Psychology, MCOM Sports Management, MA Communication and Journalism, MA Public Relations, MSc Data Science and Business Analytics, MSc Quality Control, Quality Assurance, Regulatory Affairs, Analytical Development, MA Psychology, Masters in Tourism Management, MA Sports PG Diploma in Sports Management, PG Diploma in Enterprise Resource Planning. For holistic personality development of the student, the college gives top priority in imparting skills for job and entrepreneurial development. The college has also introduced add-on courses institutional social responsibility for first year for 4 credits, yoga and well-being at second year level for 2 credits, and persona blooming at TY level for 2 credits. Total 8 additional credits at UG level, UG degree level programs. In keeping the spirit of learning and growing through criticism, we have set of high standards, working continuously towards advanced goals. Many of our alumni hold very good position in various fields. Patkar Vardhe College has a place of pride amongst the various education institutions in the western suburbs of Mumbai. Our college is reaccredited by NAC in its third cycle with A+ grade, securing 3.53 CGPA. Autonomy was conferred on the college from the academic year 2019-20. We are also ISO 9001-2015 certified and recipient of Best College Award by the University of Mumbai in the year 2016-17. We are also DBT Star Scheme and RUSA 2.0 awardee. We are recipient of India's Education Excellence Award 2018 Berkshire Media LLC USA. Education World India has ranked our college 43rd in India amongst the private autonomous colleges. Today, we are here for the international webinar. And I'm quite sure that our eminent scientist, Ujjwal Rathod sir, will surely enlighten us on the theme. Once again, I would like to welcome you all on the occasion of this international webinar, and I declare the webinar is inaugurated, open. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Department of Microbiology and Biotechnology of Patkar Vardhe College has been organizing BioFacet every year. Started since 2012-13, BioFacet is a stride taken by the department to provide a platform to scholars, teachers, and experts from various fields of science and technology for academic interaction, elevation, and enrichment. It has also taken initiative in helping students in extending their minds to diverse fields available in biological sciences, and since last year, BioFacet has taken the shape of international webinar. Last year onwards, we are extremely glad to organize BioFacet to an international level. This would have not been possible without your support and participation. Thank you very much, dear participants. The topic of today's webinar is CRISPR gene editing in virus research. As scientists, we are constantly bombarded with seminars on the ethics of responsible gene editing and discussion panels of what responsible policies on the usage of this technology might look like. However, we are leaving out one critical detail. This technology is meant to serve the public, and we have neglected to include them in the conversation. This inattention is not due to malice on our part as scientists. Most of us want to be better science advocates, but are unsure of where to start. Oftentimes, we find ethical or policy-type conversation uncomfortable or awkward with non-scientists. CRISPR is a genome editing tool that is creating buzz in the science world. It is faster, cheaper, and more accurate than the previous techniques of editing DNA, and has a wide range of potential applications too. In recent years, CRISPR gene editing techniques have been well developed and applied widely in several aspects of research in the biological science. In the words of Marie Curie rightly said, nothing in life is to be feared, it is only to be understood. Now is the time to understand more so that we may be fearless. We are extremely fortunate to have a renowned researcher, Dr. Ujjwal Rathod, with us today to share his research experience on genome editing in virus research. Sir has completed his MS in biological science from Bangalore and is also a genome and protein engineer with a PhD in molecular biophysics, and has experience in virology, immunology, structure-guided protein design, high-throughput CRISPR gene editing, cancer immunotherapy, and vaccine development. Sir is a resource associate from Bangalore and developed a method for rapid high throughput identification of stabilizing mutation in proteins using saturation mutagenesis coupled with FACS. E-surface display and deep sequencing worked on understanding the role of protein glycosylation in modulating immune response against the HIV-1 envelope using virus neutralization assays. Provided guidance and advice on the evolution of germline antibody precursor to generate multiple minimally mutated CD4 binding site directed anti-HIV broadly neutralizing antibodies while retaining breadth and potency. Sir is currently working as a scientist in Gladstone Institute and University of California, San Francisco, working on a novel unbiased high-throughput CRISPR gene editing platform to identify regulators of HIV latency in primary human CD4 plus T cells. Working to develop a better understanding of the host factors affecting infectivity of various human pathogenic viruses, including SARS coronavirus, contributing to the development of a method for efficient generation of isogenic primary human myeloid cells using ribonucleoproteins, involved with the COVID-19 serological testing initiative at UCSF, Zuckerberg BioHub, and Innovative Genomics Institute. He has various publications in national and international journals and has also achieved various awards like CRIM Fellowship in Basic Biomedical Research by the Foundation for AIDS Research, Center for AIDS Research, Menti Shyama Prasad Mukherjee Fellowship of the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, CSIR. Government of India awarded Dr. R.K. Mallar Memorial Medal by the Council of Indian Institute of Science for the best student of integrated PhD program in biological science. Won the T.J. Gautam Memorial Fellowship at the Indian Institute of Science. We welcome you, sir, and it is an honor to have such an eminent personality amongst us today. Before we begin with the webinar, I request all the participants to be kindly patient if any technical problem arises during the webinar. We will try to resolve all the technical glitches. Kindly post your questions in the chat box. It will be answered at the end of the session. Please maintain the decorum of the webinar. We are sure that this webinar will certainly complement to your learning objective. Now, I would request Ujjwal Rathore, sir, to address the webinar.
Thank you very much, all the organizers, for inviting me to present this lecture. And and I'm very excited to have a nice discussion with all the students on CRISPR gene editing in virus research. Let me just share my slides. Okay. I hope you can see my screen.
Yes, sir, it is visible.
Okay. I'm very thankful for the nice introduction. And so the topic I'm going to be talking about today is how to use gene editing to study viruses, human viruses. Everyone is interested in viruses these days because of the ongoing pandemic. The SARS-CoV-2 infection, SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19 pandemic has created a havoc throughout the world. And it's important then that we teach students ways to study these viruses. And before I come to the topic of discussion today, I would just like to quickly go through where I come from. I did most of my schooling in Delhi in a government school in Hindi medium, and then did my bachelor's in biomedical sciences from Acharya Nayan Dev College, University of Delhi. And as it was told in the introduction, then I moved to IISc Bangalore to do my integrated PhD, where I worked on designing vaccines for viral diseases. And my PhD was mostly focused on designing vaccines for HIV. This work, designing vaccines, it made me interested in viruses. It made me interested in understanding what happens when we put these vaccines into human body, or what happens when the viruses enters into human body. So to find answers to these questions, I moved to UCSF and Gladstone Institutes. And this UCSF basically is in California, Bay Area. And this is this is the building where I work these days. And I work in Marsan Lab, where we use DNA editing, gene editing, to understand how our immune system works. And we want to understand how our immune system works because we want to develop knowledge of our immune system to find treatment for new types of cancers. So, for example, there is no treatment for many types of lung cancer. So we want to figure out a way to treat lung cancers. We want to also, understand our immune system to find treatments for autoimmune disorders like arthritis, and also to find solutions for treatments for infectious diseases. And while rest of the lab actually is, rest of the Marsan lab is focused mainly on cancer and autoimmune disorders, I am most interested in viruses. And I'm interested in viruses which infect humans. So I'm interested in viruses that cause disease, like SARS-CoV-2 virus, flu virus, or HIV virus. And as I said, that I use gene editing, CRISPR gene editing, to study viral infections, to understand how these viruses make us sick, how they enter into our body, how they enter into human cells, and what they do once they're inside our cells. So because I use CRISPR to study viruses, I think the first question we need to deal today is, what is CRISPR? And I am sure many of you students might have heard about CRISPR before, and you are familiar with it. But let me start at the very beginning. In 1993, a Spanish scientist, Francisco Mujica, he was studying bacteria. And when he was studying bacteria, he was sequencing bacterial genome. And he found something very strange in the bacterial genome. He noticed some weird repetitive sequences in the DNA of bacteria, which is shown here. This repetitive sequence is shown in blue here. You can see that the sequence which starts with AAA T, it's getting repeated again and again in the genome of bacteria. And there is a unique DNA sequence in between these repeats. So he was very curious, what is this repeat sequence? Why it's present so many times in bacteria? What's the function of this DNA sequence? But he had no answer at that time. In year 2002, so it took almost a decade, another scientist, he called these repeative DNA sequences as clustered, regularly interspaced short palindromic repeats, or in short, CRISPR. So what does it mean? So clustered means that all these repeative DNA sequences were together in the genome at one location, and they were regularly interspaced. So there was a fixed spacing between these repeat sequences, and these DNA sequences were palindromic, which means that you can, if you read them from any end, from 5, and they will read the same. So AAA triple T on one side and AAA triple T on the other side as well. So he called this clustered, regularly interspaced short palindromic repeats, or CRISPR in short. But so it was not clear what is the function of this DNA element. But he found that there are some genes which are always found near these repeat sequences. Some genes which are always found. So there was a consensus that these DNA sequences are playing some role in bacteria, but we didn't know what role they are playing. And in 2005, again, Francisco Mujica with a colleague, he discovered that parts of CRISPR regions called spacers match DNA snippets from bacteriophages. So bacteriophages are viruses that infect bacteria. The meaning of word bacteriophage is bacteria eaters. And so like we have viruses which infect us, like HIV virus, it's called human immunodeficiency virus. And so similarly, bacteria can also be infected with viruses. And so what Mujica found was, interestingly, that the sequence which is present between two repeats is called, and he called it spacer. This sequence shown in red and black here, this sequence actually comes from viruses. And that was a very, very interesting discovery, why bacteria has a sequence that comes from viruses within its genome. And so they made a hypothesis that probably CRISPR is an immune system of bacteria. Like we have immune system, similarly bacteria can also have immune system to protect it against invading pathogens. So they said that CRISPR is probably an immune system that some bacteria develop to protect themselves against viruses. But they were not sure how this immune system works. So they also discovered a protein which was called Cas9 because it was CRISPR associated protein. So it was just next to where these repeat sequences were present in the genome. And they predicted that this Cas9 protein is a nuclease and it can cut DNA and it can cut RNA. So there was in 2005 we got some hints, probably this repeat sequences and the spacers between them, the unique spacers which come from viruses, from bacteriophages, they somehow form the immune system, a part of the immune system of bacteria. Then in 2007, this dairy company Danisco, they were interested in studying bacterial immunity, right? Sometimes people ask, why would you study bacteria's immune system? You should study human immune system because we want to prevent human diseases. Who will study bacterial immune system? But now you will understand that it's important to study basic biology, study even bacteria, viruses, and even viruses which don't infect us to make some basic fundamental discoveries. So this dairy company Danisco, they were interested in bacterial immunity because when they were having their manufacturing plants where they were making yogurt and cheese, they found that sometimes viruses that can infect bacteria, they can just kill all their bacteria, and which can be disaster for the industry, right? So if a viral infection kills all your bacteria that are making cheese, you will not get any, you cannot have any cheese productions, right? So they were studying bacterial immunity for that reason. And they proved that CRISPR is an adaptive immune system. So what is the meaning of adaptive immune system? You can have immune system that functions the same way for every pathogen coming, and you can have an adaptive immune system that can adapt to an upcoming pathogen. So they found that bacteria, what bacteria does, it takes a picture of invading viral DNA and use it to identify future invaders. So just imagine, for example, you are at your home and you find out that, oh, there is a thief that is doing that is stealing stuff from homes these days, and but you can find a picture of that thief somewhere. So you put it out in your colony and you say that, okay, if you see this person here, then inform police, call police, right? Similarly, what bacteria can do is, bacteria using CRISPR, when a virus comes and infects a bacteria. So here in red you can see a bacteriophage or bacteria's virus. When it comes and infects a bacteria, which is shown in gray here, what it does is it injects its DNA into the bacteria for infecting it. But what bacteria can do, certain bacteria can do, they can take a part of viral DNA. So they can take a part of viral DNA and put it inside their DNA. So they can take a small piece of viral DNA and store it in their genome. And why do they do that? Because they're taking a picture, a snippet of the virus, so that if the virus comes again, and so the virus comes the second time, then they are ready in their CRISPR locus. They have the spacer, they have the sequence from the virus, and using this, they can recognize, oh, this virus is here again. Let's cut it. Let's destroy it. Let's destroy its DNA. So what happens is that, as I said, the CRISPR-Cas9 is in bacterial adaptive immune system. So when a virus infects bacteria and injects its DNA into bacteria, bacteria recognizes a specific sequence in the virus, cuts it with what? Cuts it with Cas9 protein, which is nothing but a molecular scissor. It's a nuclease which can cut DNA at very specific locations. So it cuts virus DNA and integrates it into its own genome, and then uses it next time to cut the viral DNA. So in 2008 and 2010, other scientists showed that Cas proteins are guided to the matching foreign DNA by CRISPR RNAs. Transcribed from the stored spacers. So what does it mean? So you see here in blue are the repeat sequences, whereas in orange and dark blue here you see the spacer sequences which are coming from viruses. So these spacer sequences, they transcribe RNA. So an RNA is made from these sequences, and that RNA is used as a guide. So when a virus comes from outside, this RNA goes and find, and if in the incoming virus, there is a complementary sequence of this RNA, that RNA, then the Cas9 protein goes there and cuts the incoming DNA. So they showed that CRISPR-Cas9 cuts DNA at a very precise spot, and it's next to a sequence called PAM, which is protospacer adjacent motif, which is a 3 base pair sequence, and it just cuts DNA next to it. So basically what scientists found was that, okay, so we have found a tool that can cut DNA of viruses, bacterial viruses, wherever you want to cut it. And you can have this CRISPR RNA, design a CRISPR RNA that can direct you to a specific gene, and you can cut it exactly where the spot where you want to cut it. So, but we were not sure how to use this technology, in other systems. So in bacteria, what we understood what is happening in bacteria, but we wanted to use it for human diseases, for treating human disease, for understanding human immune system. So I already explained this, that once you recognize a specific piece of DNA is present in the virus, a CRISPR system can just cut it there. And in 2011, 2012, two amazing scientists, Emmanuel Charpentier and Jennifer Doudna, they discovered that a small RNA called trans-activating CRISPR RNA or tracer RNA, right? So previously we had RNA that was called, I'll go back to that, right? It was called CRISPR RNA, right? CRISPR RNA is the RNA which is complementary to the region where you make a cut with Cas9. And these two scientists discovered that a small RNA called trans-activating CRISPR RNA or tracer RNA must bind to CRISPR RNA in order to guide the Cas9 to the target. So, okay, so it's getting a little complicated. Let me make it simple, okay? We have three components here. So if you want to cut DNA, we have three components here. First thing is that you need to figure out where you want to cut the DNA. So for that, we have CRISPR RNA. CRISPR RNA guides us where to make a cut in the DNA. Tracer RNA makes a complex with CRISPR RNA, and Cas9 nuclease binds to this complex and makes a specific cut in the DNA. So we need a nuclease Cas9. We need a tracer RNA for Cas9 to be able to make a cut in the DNA, and we need a tracer RNA to guide Cas9 and a CRISPR RNA to guide Cas9. So what Jennifer Doudna did something very, very clever. She thought that, okay, there are three components in this system of genome editing. Why don't we fuse two components? So what they did was they fused this CRISPR RNA and tracer RNA to make a single RNA molecule called single guide RNA. Why it's called guide RNA? Because it guides Cas9 to a place in the genome where the Cas9 should make a cut. That's why it's called guide RNA, because it guides where the cut should be made, where the DNA should be cut. And so they demonstrated that if you change the sequence of this single guide RNA, then you can cut at another location in the genome. So this sgRNA decides where the cut in the genome is going to be made. And some of you might know that both these amazing scientists, they got a Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 2020 for discovering this DNA editing tool. It's called CRISPR-Cas9. And the way so here you see that Cas9 protein is shown as a bubble, and the guide RNA and the tracer the guide RNA is a portion of the single guide RNA shown in green, and tracer RNA portion is shown in gray. So what happens is that this RNA sequence, when Cas9 finds there is a match for it in the DNA, it cuts the DNA at a location which is just upstream of the PAM sequence. And I would like to also add here that Jennifer Doudna works in the same department where I work. And this is a picture from when she won the Nobel Prize, describing how she feels about it, getting a Nobel Prize for a basic discovery she made a decade ago. So it's a privilege to be able to work in presence of such giants. So let's get into the little bit details of how CRISPR-Cas9 system works for gene editing. So I said that what Cas9 does is Cas9 looks for PAM protospecific adjacent motif in the target DNA, and if it finds a proto-adjacent motif that is adjacent to the sequence that matches with your single guide RNA, then Cas9 protein makes a cut in the DNA. So it makes a double strand break in the DNA. It cuts the DNA and creates a break there, right? And then two things can happen. First thing is that using non-homologous end joining, you can, generate insertion or deletion in DNA. So for example, like there is a gene which you are interested in studying, you can design a guide RNA that matches a part of that gene, and you can put that guide RNA and Cas9 into human cells. And then because Cas9 will, cut that particular DNA at a specific location and create insertions and deletions in that gene. So you can disrupt that gene. You can disrupt the function of that gene. Suppose that gene is important for, making a particular protein. Then if you cut that DNA, that protein cannot be made, right? And similarly, what you can also do is you can also provide a small piece of DNA from outside, extra piece of DNA from outside, and then you can replace parts of DNA with this method. So what you can do is you can remove some genes, from the genome, or you can add new sequences to the DNA. So it's like, like computer programmers do this coding, right? So they do copy paste. They copy, or when you are writing a document in Microsoft Word, you copy something from a place, you paste it at one place, or you delete a sentence. Now we can do all those things with CRISPR-Cas9. And we can, it's very, very easy to use tool, and we can basically cut a piece of DNA and insert a new piece of DNA there. So so gene editing with CRISPR, what you need to do is to target different DNA sequences. You always use the same protein, Cas9, which is the nuclease that cuts DNA. And I call Cas9 as a molecular scissor. It cuts molecules, it cuts DNA. And all you need to do is you need to just order or make these single guide RNAs targeting a specific gene, targeting a specific sequence in the DNA. And then you can make a cut in DNA at that place. So this can be used to easily inactivate thousands of genes or knock out thousands of human genes, or any genes, plant genes, and see what happens when you knock out a particular gene. For example, suppose you want to find out a function of a particular gene. Then what you can do is you can delete that gene from human cells and see what happens. So you might be able to figure it out, what's going on. It's, as an example, I'll tell you, like, for example, if you are riding a scooter and you want to figure out, okay, what does this button do? You get rid of that button and you see that, okay, now this function, this is not happening. This thing is not working. Okay, that must be this button doing. Similarly, we can remove genes from human genome and figure out what those genes are doing. Now, this is really revolutionary for studying biology and for finding treatment for new diseases. And I'll explain how. But so the focus for today's talk is how can we use CRISPR to study human viruses? So let's see how we do that. Let's see how I do that and the things which I study. So just let's get to the very, very basics of DNA and proteins first. So the way I like to explain what DNA is, because sometimes if you're explaining it to a lay audience, then how will you explain what is DNA? What does it do? I think of DNA as a recipe book. And so DNA is like a recipe book that makes, if you follow the recipe, then you can make dishes from that DNA information given in that recipe book called proteins. So proteins are like, dishes you make from a recipe book, that's DNA. And so each cell has the same DNA. So each human cell, if you take, the DNA sequence is exactly the same. But some genes are expressed in one cells and other genes are not expressed in other cells. So for example, your eye cells in your eyes might express a particular protein that is not expressed in your brain cells, in your neurons, or in your heart cells. And that's because how these genes are regulated, how their expression is regulated. Now, what viruses can do, when viruses enter into our human cells, they can hijack our machinery. Viruses are very, very, very small as compared to us, but they have evolved to hijack our genes. So what they do is when viruses enter into human cells, they hijack our genes and they force our genes to make specific proteins, specific human proteins in different quantities. And then they use those proteins to make more copies of themselves. So viruses are master hijackers. And we need to really understand how viruses hijack our system and which genes they hijack, so that we can develop new drugs to break this hijacking and find treatment for viral diseases. So before I come to which viral disease I want to talk about and which virus disease I'm studying these days using CRISPR, I want to talk a little bit about the history of pandemics. And we know there's an ongoing pandemic right now. COVID-19 pandemic is going on. However, there's another pandemic that is going on for the last 40 years. HIV/AIDS pandemic started in 1981, and it is still ongoing. More than 500,000 people die every year of AIDS. And despite 40 years of research, we neither have a vaccine for HIV infection, nor we have a cure for it. So, and why is that? Why, when we can make a vaccine for SARS-CoV-2 in 1 year, why can't we make a vaccine for HIV? Why can't we find cure, drugs to treat HIV? So if someone gets infected with HIV, they need to take antiretroviral drugs for the rest of their lives. If you miss it for a week, the virus comes back. And why is that? So that's the question we are going to address today with CRISPR, and try to understand how we can use CRISPR-Cas9 gene editing to find a cure for HIV/AIDS. So HIV is a retrovirus, which means that it's an RNA virus, and it reverse transcribes RNA to DNA. So HIV is an enveloped virus, and HIV virus, what it infects is, it infects a specific type of immune cells called CD4 plus T cells. So HIV virus, when it sees a CD4 plus T cell, it attaches to the surface of the cells with CD4 receptor, help the CD4 receptor, and then enters inside CD4 plus T cells. It gets uncoated and exposes its RNA. This RNA is then reverse transcribed into DNA. Now this DNA, this HIV DNA, enters into our nucleus, and where it goes and gets integrated into our genome. And then once it's integrated into our genome, it can start making more viral RNA. And that viral RNA comes out from nucleus to cytoplasm, makes new viral proteins. And these viral proteins then make new viral, virus particles which come out of cells. So this is how what virus is doing is it's entering into our cells. It's converting its RNA genome into DNA. The DNA is getting integrated into our genome, and it's making more copies of itself. The problem is a lot of viruses, infect in the same way. But difference with HIV is that sometimes what it can do is it can enter into the human genome and not do anything. Like it sometimes doesn't make any viral proteins. So it just stays integrated. It stays hidden in the human genome. So it can just sit and hide there. And when it's hiding there, those cells don't produce any virus. So the drugs, the antiviral drugs that we use, they can't see such infected cells. So they are invisible. So such cells are called latently infected cells because they are latent, they are hidden. And HIV, so such latently infected cells, even after taking antiviral drugs for 20 years, 30 years, such cells survive, such HIV infected cells survive because the drugs, they can't kill such cells because there is no virus produced from these cells. So they just look like our healthy, normal cells. And when a patient stops taking these antiviral drugs, then this virus sometimes, this integrated virus can sometimes again start making viral proteins and making new viruses, which again go and infect more cells. So this is the problem, that HIV virus can become latent, it can hide into cells, and we don't understand how it hides inside the cells. And that's why there is no cure for HIV. That's why you have to take medication for it throughout your life. And so my goal is to basically understand how virus hides inside these cells, and can we use CRISPR-Cas9 gene editing to understand this whole process. The thing is that, as I said, that virus, I would say that latency is the Achilles heel of HIV virus. We need to, some virus is sleeping inside patient cells, patient CD4 plus T cells, and we need to find a way to, activate this virus so that it comes out of cells. And then those infected cells are visible to our immune system and to antiretroviral drugs so that we can kill those infected cells. So this is what we want to do. We want to use CRISPR-Cas9 genetic engineering to find out how virus is hiding inside our cells. Before we get into the details of this process, I want to tell that that we need to really understand how virus is infecting human cells, how it's hiding, right? And it's a very, very complicated process. HIV virus is probably the most well-studied human virus known. We are studying this virus for the last 40 years, and we know a lot about it. HIV virus just has 9 genes, and it encodes for 15 proteins. And we have 20,000 genes. But then when this virus with just 9 genes and 15 proteins, it enters into our cells, it uses those 15 proteins to hijack our proteins. It's like someone coming into your home. And then you don't notice that person is inside your home, and that person goes into some empty room. The person hides there, and you don't know there is an invader at home. But you notice that, okay, what is happening is that I am seeing that some food is disappearing from the refrigerator. And then you notice, okay, my blanket is also one of the blanket is also missing. Then you also notice that, okay, it means that someone is here, but it's hiding, and it's using our stuff from our home. And how to find this person, right? So similarly, HIV also enters into human cells, uses our proteins to make more copies of itself. And we have no idea what all it is using from our cells. We need to figure it out what it needs, because if we figure out which human proteins this virus needs to hide inside the cells or to infect the human cells, we can find drugs that can block the action of those proteins and find a treatment for HIV, right? For example, if this person, the invader in your home, which is hiding in one of the rooms, if suppose you figure out, okay, this person cannot tolerate heat. If we switch off the AC, this person is going to come out, and then we are going to kick him out of the home. So you figure out, if we switch off the AC, then he will come out. So then you are done, right? You can bring the invader out and you can throw him out of your home. Similarly, if we figure out which human gene we will knock out that will make this virus visible, then we can find a cure for HIV. That's the idea. As I said, people have been studying this problem for the last 40 years, and they haven't found a solution for it yet. And what's the reason for that? One thing was we didn't have such powerful genome editing methods before, where you can knock out each gene in human DNA, and so that protein will go away. The protein encoded by that gene will go away, and then you can figure out basically what's the role of this protein in HIV infection or another viral infection. Secondly, even after these CRISPR gene editing tools were developed, people were not able to use these tools directly on human cells, what I call primary human cells. So like cells which you take out from a human's body, and can you edit genes in there and infect with a virus and figure out what's going on. What people were using was, to study these HIV infection, they were using something called cell lines. Cell lines are artificial cells. Basically, they are cells that you can grow in the lab, and they can keep on dividing, and you can keep on doing experiments on them. But they are not real, actual immune cells which are present in a human body. They are different. And because they are a little different, that's why when people were studying viral infection, those cells, they couldn't find answers for the questions they were looking for. So what I want to do is, what we are doing is, we want to study this HIV infection in actual human blood, in human cells. And you can't put a virus into a human's body, right? So how will you study something like this? So that's what I'm going to describe what I'm doing. So I have developed a method to study HIV virus latency, which means that I have developed a method to study which human genes virus is hijacking to hide inside human cells. And I'm going to describe this in a little bit of detail, how we are doing this. So what we do is, we get this, every week we get blood from healthy human donors. We get blood from human donors. We isolate these immune cells called CD4 plus T cells. These are also called helper T cells. These are the cells that are infected by HIV virus. So we get blood, we isolate these immune cells from the blood, and then we infect them with a specially designed HIV virus that I made in the lab. So I made this HIV virus. This is a hybrid virus. So what I have done is, I have put CRISPR gene editing machinery within HIV genome. So I have made a HIV virus, which when infects cells, it delivers a guide RNA that targets a specific gene into those cells. And so what I can do is, I can actually I can take a lot of cells, millions of CD4 plus T cells, infect these cells with the HIV hybrid virus that I made. And each cell will get a different guide RNA targeting different genes. For example, guide RNA number one will target gene number 1, guide RNA number 2 will target gene number 2. And then I use electric current to put Cas9 protein into these cells. So what you do is, I said there are 3 components of CRISPR gene editing, right? So tracer RNA, CRISPR RNA, and Cas9, right? And Jennifer Doudna combined tracer RNA and CRISPR RNA to make single guide RNA, right? And so what I have done is, I have put this single guide RNA machinery into HIV genome. When a cell gets infected with HIV, it starts producing those guide RNAs, and then you use electric shock to put Cas9 into those cells. When you do that, cell has both the components required for gene editing. It has the guide RNA, it has Cas9. So you can cut a specific gene inside human cells, and you can cut whichever gene you want. So, and I have developed this method in such a way that you can cut all 20,000 genes at once. So you can have, like, for example, you can have 100 million human cells in one test tube, and then you infect those cells with HIV, and then you give them electric shock, put Cas9 protein in there, and then in different cells, you will get different genes edited. So in cell number 1, for example, you can edit a gene CXCR4. In cell number 2, you edit a gene which is ATP1B3. So you can edit different genes in different cells. So what we do is, let me start from the beginning. Isolate cells, infect with this HIV guide RNA virus library, which targets all 20,000 human genes. And then you force this virus to hide. So you use a chemical drug which forces this virus to go into hiding. So it goes and hides inside human cells. Then you put this Cas9 protein into these cells, and because of which genes will get edited, and you get these edited cells. And once these cells are edited, what happens is that in cell number 1, suppose gene A is edited, okay? And so now this gene is deleted, it cannot make protein A. And if protein A is important for virus to stay hidden, now that protein is not there, it's just like blanket example, right? So, or AC example. So you switched off the AC, and AC is not there, and now the intruder is out. Similarly here, you delete a particular gene that is required for virus to stay hidden. You delete that gene, and now virus cannot stay hidden. It comes out. It comes out to cells. And when it comes out to the cells, we collect that virus. We collect that virus, and we use next generation sequencing to sequence that virus. And just by doing that sequencing, because the virus has a guide RNA inserted into it, I can figure out, okay, so this virus is coming from this particular cell because the guide RNA barcode, so virus is barcoded with the guide RNA sequence. And I can actually figure out if mutation of gene A is important for virus to stay latent, or if mutation of gene B is required for virus to be reactivated. And so we can figure out function of all 20,000 genes in HIV latency or in viral pathogenesis. So this is a little technical, I'll not go into this, but basically we knock out a particular gene that is a latency maintenance factor. It is required for maintenance of latency. So if you knock out that gene, then virus cannot stay latent, it cannot stay hidden. So more virus will be produced. And when more virus will be produced, we'll figure out that, okay, if you knock out this particular gene, then the virus is getting more produced. So this is a gene we need to target actually for finding a cure for HIV. Or you can also find out a gene which when you knock out, the virus just stays latent. It doesn't come out. It doesn't make any more viral particles. So that can also be used for therapy, right? Because if you find out a gene that if you design a drug against it, and then you can block HIV virus from reactivation. So even after patients will stop their therapy, the virus will not reactivate. It will not start infecting cells again. So I know this is a little complicated, but I would love to take any questions if you have at the end. So this is what you can do. So we did this approach, and we found out a lot of genes. So each block you see in dark blue here, that represents a gene that is important for latency maintenance. And we did this all in actual human blood samples. And we found out many genes, which if you delete, then the virus comes out from latency. And we also found out genes, which if you delete, then virus cannot come out of latency. You can block the virus there, right? So there are two ways people are thinking about finding a cure for HIV. The first approach is called block and lock, that you block wherever the virus is inside the cell, just block it there so that it can't make more copies. So these are the genes in yellow, what we identified that can block the virus. And the genes in blue are the genes which is called shock and kill. So if you target these genes, then the viral production will start, and antiretroviral drug will kill those infected cells. So we did this, and we can also use this approach to study other aspects of viral infection. So once virus enters into human cells, what does it do, where it goes, which proteins it hijacks? We have figured out a way to do that as well. So how I do that? So again, I take blood from healthy human donors, isolate immune cells from those cells, and then use a lentivirus vector, to deliver guide RNAs into those cells. put Cas9 in there and generate these edited cells. So what do you mean by generate edited cells? Like you have a pool of cells, you have millions of cells, and each cell has a different gene deleted in those cells. So you have this mixture of cells with different genes deleted in different cells. Now you take these edited cells, these gene deleted cells, pool of gene deleted cells, and infected these with HIV. Okay, so when you infect these cells with HIV, suppose a deletion of gene A makes cell resistant to HIV infection, right? Then you'll figure it out. Okay, so if I delete this gene in human genome, then HIV cannot infect. Or if I delete this gene in human genome, then HIV infection is not very efficient. It's then you find out, okay, this is the protein that virus is hijacking to make more copies of itself, and this is the protein I'm going to target to find a drug against it, to find a treatment for HIV or cure. So this is another method that I have developed to study using CRISPR-Cas9 gene editing to study HIV host interactions at a large scale. Now, some of you might think that, okay, I'm talking about HIV because I mostly work on HIV. But what are the other applications? What can we do if we have a tool? Like, I'll ask you this question to you also. You should think about it. All the students should think about it. If you have this CRISPR-Cas9 gene editing tool in your hands, if you have a way to edit cut DNA, what will you do with it? What problems will you solve with it? So what problems other people are solving with this? What are my friends, my colleagues here at UCSF doing with it? So another thing I'm doing is I'm using this gene editing method to find out a solution to a very, very unique problem. And I'll describe what that problem is. So in 1981, when HIV was discovered, 2 years later, so when AIDS pandemic started, HIV, it took 2-3 years to figure out, okay, the AIDS is happening because of a viral infection. So in 1983, multiple different groups discovered that HIV virus causes AIDS. Dr. Jay Levy, who works at UCSF, he at that time found out that there are certain HIV patients, they get infected with HIV, but they never develop AIDS. They never develop disease. Their CD4 cell counts are always maintained, and they can stay healthy. And he's following those patients for last 35 years. So they were infected in 1981, 1983 at that time, but they are still disease-free, no AIDS, without any medication, without any drugs. Very interesting, right? But we don't understand how these people are able to control the disease, how they don't develop AIDS without any drugs. But if we can study these patients carefully, then we might find out a way to find a cure for HIV, right? Because somehow they are also controlling HIV without any drugs. So if we understand how their immune system is doing it, we might also be able to replicate it. So, so what I'm doing is I am editing. So the method I described earlier, using my hybrid HIV virus, I'm doing gene knockouts in these cells. I'm editing, 20,000 genes at once, all human genes, deleting all human genes in these cells. And then what I'm doing is I'm getting blood from these HIV patients who do not develop AIDS. I'm getting their blood. And then we found out that in their blood, their killer T cells, CD8 plus T cells, they secrete something that can block HIV transcription, that can stop HIV from replication. But no one knows what the secret, what's that magic compound, what are they secreting from the cells, right? So what we are doing is we have generated these edited cells where human genes are deleted. And we are taking these HIV patient samples and we are taking their CD8 T cells, and we grow these HIV infected cells in presence of these CD8 plus T cells. And these CD8 cells secrete something that blocks HIV replication. And because now we don't know what it blocks, how it blocks HIV replication, right? So, but because you have this pool of deleted human gene deleted cells, you can use this to figure out, okay, actually how that HIV transcription is inhibited. So, we might be actually able to solve this problem, which is standing for the last 35 years, and find out how some HIV patients never develop AIDS. So you can use CRISPR gene editing to answer such interesting questions as well. But what about other viruses? Can we use it for other viruses? So this is the work from some of my colleagues at UCSF, some of my friends. They used a genetic screen. So again, CRISPR mediated genome editing to identify which host factors are involved in SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19 virus, SARS-CoV-2 infection, common cold coronaviruses. So what they did was they took human cells. They knocked out all human genes in those cells using CRISPR. So KO refers to knockout. So just delete all human genes, one gene in one cell, and infect with SARS-CoV-2 and two common cold like viruses, which are very similar to SARS-CoV-2, but they don't cause serious disease. They just cause common cold. So you infect these cells with the coronavirus and other viruses, and then some cells will die because of viral infection. But then you select the virus resistant cells, those cells which are not getting infected with the virus. And then you use next generation sequencing to figure out, okay, which genes are, which host factors, which host genes are required for virus to infect. Because if you find a cell which is resistant to viral infection, that means you have deleted a gene in there which is required for virus to do the infection. So we do this, and this is a work from my colleagues, and so they figured out many host genes that are required for virus to infect our cells. So and this can be used for finding new drugs for COVID-19. Similarly, you can also use CRISPR-Cas9 for diagnostic techniques, right? So what one of my friend, she developed this technique where what they did was they're using CRISPR. And it's not CRISPR-Cas9, it's a different Cas protein, it's a different nuclease, different scissor. So the scissor is different. It's called Cas13. So what they do, the Cas13, so the Cas9 nuclease cuts DNA, but Cas13 nuclease cuts RNA. And you know that SARS-CoV-2 is an RNA virus. So what you can do is you can take a nasopharyngeal swab in which some virus will come. You can extract the viral RNA from that swab, and then you can add some guide RNAs targeting N gene and E gene of SARS-CoV-2. And so you are adding some guide RNAs here, right? And then you are also adding Cas13. Cas13 cuts RNA. So now if there is viral RNA present in the sample, then it will cut this particular RNA. And that will develop a fluorescence, which you can just detect on your mobile phone. So they have, using CRISPR-Cas9, they have developed a diagnostic tool because it can cut RNA, it can cut DNA. So they have used this to develop a diagnostic tool that can be used to test for COVID-19 in 5 minutes. So this gives results in 5 minutes, and you can use a mobile phone using this. So there are many things you can do once you learn how to edit these genes. You can do things to help humanity. You can do things to answer new biological questions, and that's what we do. I hope you were able to understand some of it. I know it was very technical, but I am happy to take any questions that you might have. And thank you so much for listening. I would like to thank all the people in the lab who are helping with this work that we are doing, we're developing. So I work with two labs, Marsden Lab and the Krogan Lab. And I would like to thank all our funders who fund our research. And I'm ready to take questions now.
Yes, hello, sir. I am Sridevi, and I'll help you with the Q&A session. Before we, take questions, I would like to say a few words for you. Firstly, I would go ahead and thank you for the beautiful presentation. It was absolutely amazing, to be honest. Starting from the absolute zero basics to a detailed description, to the hidden potential of the technique, to its application. It was a beautiful journey listening to you. It was literally a treat to see what you are currently working on, and what is the current status of HIV research, and what parts are missing in it, and what is the future of this particular research. Your method to screen and study HIV latency was amazing, followed by how you could target genes for deletion and prevent infection entirely in the first place. Also, your approach to find gene products, which is completely responsible to just escape the AIDS stage of the HIV. I am very much thank you that you have brought so many interesting things to the table today. We do have a few questions in the chat box. First, I think we have a question by yes, we have by Siley. Why haven't vaccines been successful yet against HIV protein or even HIV RNA?
Yeah, very good question. So HIV virus mutates very fast. HIV is an enveloped virus, so it has an envelope outside it. And then that envelope is made of a specific protein called GP120 or glycoprotein GP120 because it's 120 kilodaltons in molecular weight. Now this protein, so when someone gets infected, most of the antibodies are generated against this protein. And this is the protein that helps virus infect CD4 plus T cells. This is the protein that is required for attachment to CD4 plus T cells and enter. Now, we develop antibodies against this protein, but what happens is that virus mutates so fast that any antibody you develop, that becomes ineffective, very, very quickly. Like you must be hearing about SARS-CoV-2, right? That SARS-CoV-2 variants are coming. So some of the vaccines might not be effective in the future because the virus will change so much that the antibodies you generate with vaccines are not going to be effective against the new variants. But HIV virus mutates much faster than SARS-CoV-2. There is no comparison how fast it mutates. So one thing is that it mutates very fast. Second thing is that this GP120 protein, which is the main target for vaccine design, this has many immunodominant regions. Immunodominant means most of the antibodies are generated against those regions, and then virus changes those regions very quickly. There are some conserved regions which we can target, but those are covered with sugars, with glycans. So your immune system cannot target that. So in vaccine design, what people are trying to do, what I try to do during my PhD, and it's moving forward, is that can we focus our immune response to a very conserved region of the virus that virus cannot change? Because virus will also need to keep something constant to enter into the cells, right? Because it needs to get attached to CD4 cells. So right now, what we are trying to do is figure out a way so that we can make vaccines that target very, very specific region of the virus, and virus should not be able to change that region. So those antibodies will work. But right now, no one has been able to successfully target that conserved regions on the virus because virus hides those regions. But it's going on, and there is good progress in this area.
Okay, yes, sir. We have from Richa another question. She asks, sir, what happens if a virus genetically mutated itself? How this technique helps in that case?
Amazing question. Very nice question. So virus does get mutated, right? And when we do these experiments, we take one virus, a wild type virus, and do it with that. But what we also do is sometimes we take these mutant viruses and we take these genetically edited cells and infect them with these mutated viruses and try to figure out, okay, if virus is mutating, then what's happening? So suppose you delete a human gene and infect it with a mutant virus, then what happens? You infect with wild type virus, then what happens? So you can figure it out with just doing experiments with mutant viruses. And this technique can actually help you figure out that in a viral protein and a human protein, where exactly they meet, where exactly they interact, because you take a mutant of this viral protein and you take a mutant of this human protein, and when you put them together, you see that, okay, if this viral protein is a mutant now, this can bind with human protein much more strongly, can do much better infection, right? So what should you change in the human protein? What drug should you use so that the mutant virus can also not infect?
Okay, we have another question from Mugda. Can knocking out specific genes for blocking or exposing HIV virus create other adversities if used in treatment?
Absolutely, it's possible, because you cannot knock out or delete an essential gene, right? A gene which is required in your body to do a particular function. You cannot delete that gene. But once you find out, okay, this is a gene that virus is hijacking, even if that's essential, even if you can't delete that gene, you will figure out what's happening inside the cells. So virus is hijacking this particular protein, that this protein is doing starting a signaling cascade, and so you can figure out, you can find out some step in that pathway that you can target with a drug, so that there are minimal side effects to humans, but you still get rid of viral infection. This is a problem that is similar to cancer treatment, right? Because the healthy human cells look very similar to cancerous cells, and when you target cancer cells, your healthy cells also die. But if you can find out a solution where you mostly kill viral infected cells, but your remaining cells can still function, then you have a solution. And I would like to point out that we are not looking, like, particularly I am not looking at a solution where we delete human genes and then make someone treat someone of HIV, because it's going to be very expensive and difficult thing to do, to take every HIV patient and edit their genes. What we are trying to figure out is using gene editing, we are trying to figure out what are the important interactions between the viral proteins and human proteins. And once we find those out, we can have small molecule drugs that can disrupt that interaction. So you don't need to delete any genes or do gene editing further. So here the gene editing is used for discovery, but for ultimate treatment, you don't need to use gene editing.
Okay, we have a question with respect to cancer as well. It asks, I guess Mansi is asking how CRISPR is used in cancer treatment.
Yeah, CRISPR is used heavily for finding treatment for new types of cancer. I can give you some personal examples as well. The lab I work in, a lot of my friends, they use instead of using CRISPR for virus diseases, they use CRISPR for cancer, finding treatments for new types of cancers. And what they do is, so I'll give you an example. So sometimes kids under the age of 5 years, they get this type cancer called acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Where their B cells become cancerous, and they basically they keep dividing endlessly. And earlier, what used to happen is kids used to die very, very quickly within a few months if they after detecting with acute lymphoblastic leukemia. But then we found some chemical drugs which were able to treat like 80% of children infected with this disease. But rest 15-20%, there was no drug so far. But recently, what we figured out is what we can do is we can take human immune T cells out from that infected children's body. You can take their immune cells out. You can change some genes in that T cell so that it goes inside, and you put it back inside the body. Now, this edited T cell, this is called CAR T cell. So this edited T cell, if you put it back into the patient's body, it goes and finds cancerous cells and kills them. So you are making these nano robots with gene editing. So you can, because we know that immune cells can kill cancer, but sometimes they are not fully efficient in killing it, right? So you take those cells out of the body, modify them, put them back, and get rid of the cancer. And it has very, very high success rate. We are treating acute lymphoblastic leukemia at UCSF hospitals with this method, and on children where everything else fails, this T cell therapy works very nicely. Also, what we are doing is a lot of solid tumors. What happens is that when you have a tumor in your body, for example, in lungs, and so you have immune cells in your body that can clear that tumor. But when they reach next to that tumor releases certain chemicals that inactivate those T cells. So killer T cells cannot kill anymore because there is a suppressive microenvironment around the tumor. And so what we are doing is we are deleting genes in in these killer T cells, and then putting them in near the tumor to see that, okay, suppose I delete gene A, then the tumor is not able to suppress T cell function. So T cell will be able to still kill it. So once we find out which genes tumor suppress to make T cells ineffective, we can find treatment for solid tumors.
Yes, sir. I guess we have somebody unmuting and asking. Okay. We have a question by Mikhail. Is asking, has there been an approach? Has there been any research applying CRISPR in treatment of diseases other than viral infections, such as neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's, so that the genes leading to the misfolding of the proteins can be undone using CRISPR-Cas machinery?
Yeah, so a lot of research is going on in this area, and for neurodegenerative disorders, for blood disorders. For example, some of you might have heard that recently for sickle cell anemia, and so using CRISPR-Cas9 gene editing, you first start with more simple disorders, right? Where you just, for example, in sickle cell anemia, you have to just change one amino acid, and you do that, and then you can correct the genetic disorder. And so for retinal disorders, for treating blindness, certain types of blindness, because it's easier to do that because you can just directly inject the gene therapy into the eye, into the retina, and then treat, so it's being used for all, it's being tried for all different types of diseases. And I mentioned it briefly in my presentation that one thing you can do with CRISPR is you can delete some parts of gene, but also you can replace, right? So that replacement part comes here, that if you know the mutation because of which a protein is misfolding, you can supply a piece of DNA from outside and replace it and correct that mutation, and then you get basically a protein which is properly folded, and you basically reduce the symptoms of the disease. So yes, people are actively working on this, and there some initial breakthroughs have been made in this field as well.
We have a question from Riyaz. So can we block the receptors on the CD4 cells that the HIV virus targets?
Yeah, so the people have been trying this approach, that instead of targeting the virus, you target the host cells. and you basically what you do is you somehow, for example, you use antibodies that are against CD4, and those antibodies will block basically CD4, and then HIV virus will not be able to infect it. This approach has not been very successful so far. There is another, so HIV, apart from CD4 is a receptor for HIV, but HIV also uses a co-receptor called CXCR4 or CCR5. And CCR5 co-receptor is also required for HIV to enter into cells. And it's some people, a couple of people have been cured actually of HIV, very, like, just a couple of examples so far. So this patient called Berlin patient, he was diagnosed with cancer. And so he was given chemotherapy, radiation therapy, and bone marrow transplant. When he got the bone marrow transplant, he got his CD4 plus T cells from a donor who naturally had a mutation in CCR5 gene, a deletion mutation CCR5 gene. So his CCR5 was not functional. And so then they found that that person got cured from HIV, because whatever HIV was left in his body, it was not able to infect new CD4 plus T cells because they were lacking CCR5 gene in there. And people are, trying this approach. But as I said, doing gene editing to treat HIV is going to be very challenging. So we need to use gene editing to figure out what are the gene targets we can use, and then design drugs to actually treat HIV. That's probably is going to be more feasible in the near future.
Okay, we have a question from Tanvi. She's asking, HIV containing blood is infectious. It can't come in direct contact too. So what are the precautions that you take while you are dealing and working with such blood samples?
Yeah, not just blood samples. I make HIV virus in the lab. I make liters of it. So I use human cell lines, infect those with HIV, and then make more HIV virus. And sometimes I might be working with, a 3-liter bottle filled with HIV virus, concentrated HIV virus. So you have to take a lot of precautions while working with such pathogenic viruses. So we have so when you are working with viruses, you can have different kind of biosafety levels, what you follow. And HIV, so you can have biosafety level 1 for viruses which don't infect humans, then biosafety level 2, which can infect humans, but we have treatment for those. Biosafety level 3 are the viruses which can infect humans and we don't have an effective treatment. Biosafety level 4, which can infect through air and respiratory disorders. So I work in a biosafety level 3 facility with HIV. And the precautions we take is that first thing is HIV is transmitted through blood or mucous surfaces, right? It cannot transmit through air. So that's a good thing. So that makes it a little easy to work with HIV as compared to coronaviruses, SARS-CoV-2. And so what we do is we have a biosafety level 3 facility where I gown up. I first wear a gown, and then wear 2 layers of gloves, sleeves, so that virus cannot enter from the sleeves as well, mask, eye protection, head protection. And with all that, we go into a room where there is a air pressure is maintained in such a way that air can only enter from outside inside that room, but it cannot escape from that room. So the virus cannot escape from that room. And then you go inside there, and then you have biosafety cabinets. You sit in those biosafety cabinets with your, all this masked up, gowned up, and then you work very carefully when there's a glass between you and the virus. And you do not use any sharps, anything that can pierce through your glove and into your skin and put virus inside your blood circulation. So we do not have any scissors, we do not have any needles, we don't have any such sharp thing inside the biosafety level 3. And then I think it's years of training. You know how to handle it, what precautions to take if an accident happens.
Thank you. Anushka is asking, in latency period, how HIV virus survive and why only CD4 receptors?
In latent, so our human cells, they have a definite lifespan, but they also divide, and some of those cells, they are memory immune cells. They can survive for decades and years. So suppose if HIV infects a cell that's a memory cell and goes memory CD4 plus T cell, it goes inside, it gets into human genome. And suppose if it starts making viruses immediately, then antiretroviral therapy will be able to detect it. Okay, this cell is infected. Our immune system will be able to detect it. This cell is infected. Let's clear it. But if the virus is not doing anything, it just goes in and it just gets integrated and sits there, then it's like any other regular cell, right? Neither antiretroviral therapy nor our immune system can detect it. So it can stay hidden for years. And then sometimes those cells divide, right? So if an infected cell divides, then it makes a copy of itself. And when it makes a copy of itself, the human genome is also copied, right? One copy of human genome is converted into 2 copies. But because virus is integrated into human genome, it is also like become 2 copies. So that's how you maintain this reservoir of latently infected cells. And I don't understand the other part of the question, why only CD4 receptors? Each virus has a specific receptor that it is evolved to use. And that receptor is CD4 for HIV, for T cells. It's just that how the virus has evolved.
Rucha is asking, sir, like they study gene mutation in coronavirus, can we use a similar approach to study the gene mutations in HIV patients who never develop AIDS?
Yeah, so the way you do these kind of studies is that you sequence the genome from HIV patients who never develop AIDS, and you also get sequence from DNA sequence from patients who develop AIDS and who develop late, who develop early, and compare their all gene sequences, right, to see what is the difference between them. But our genome is huge, 20,000 genes, and there are other, so 20,000 genes are just protein coding genes. You also have a lot of region. Majority of human genome is non-protein coding, and we don't know how it functions really. So you will see so many changes between these samples. It's very difficult to figure out what is making them different. Although we have hints, we know some different what makes them different. We have some hints, but then you can also do these functional studies where you actually look at the biology, what those cells are doing different, and that's what I was explaining. That what I'm doing is I'm getting like CD8 plus T cells from these HIV patients, and I'm trying to figure out, what's different in those CD8 plus T cells. What are they making? Because CD8 plus T cells don't get infected with HIV. They secrete something that goes into infected CD4 plus T cells and blocks HIV there. So we need to figure out, think about it, it's such an interesting puzzle, right? Very, very curious question to answer. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to use gene editing to figure out what those cells are secreting and what is it doing once it gets into CD4 plus T cells by deleting these mutations, by generating these mutations, deletions. But what you asked, yes, we are trying to use these kind of approaches to figure out what's different in these long HIV patients who are called long-term non-progressors. They never progress to AIDS.
Ritik is asking, can CRISPR be helpful in curing hereditary diseases?
Yes, that's the whole idea. The CRISPR, because you can edit DNA. The whole idea is that you should be able to cure hereditary diseases, and as I said, that it's being used for treatment. It's being tested for treatment of sickle cell anemia, many other beta thalassemia, then retinal atrophy. So there are mutations because of which people start developing blindness as they grow, and so it runs in families, and so you can actually tell that a kid is going to start losing vision at this age, and then by this age he will lose almost all of his vision. And so you can use gene editing to actually, and we know which gene mutations they have, right? So you can use gene editing to correct those mutations to make sure that they don't lose their vision. So yes, that's the main field we want to use CRISPR for.
We don't have a direct question, but Devyanshi, like an application question it is. Devyanshi is asking, are the designer babies going to be a common approach sooner? And could you tell us more about them?
So what we are trying to do is use CRISPR to, edit what we call, we are not editing germ cells, right? We are not editing cells which are used to produce the next progeny. We are just editing, cells which are, for example, blood cells and all. And whatever change you are going to make, it's not going to be hereditary. It's not going to go to the next generation, because you don't know when you make a change in DNA, you don't know what else it does, right? So you don't want to. I think it's very risky to play and play with genes to which make changes that are hereditary. So what we don't do that, but designer babies, it's a multi-layered question, right? Because first thing is, what do you want to achieve? For example, if you want to make babies taller, right? So you want like tall babies, then there are many. It's a polygenic trait, and so there is not one single gene that controls height. There are hundreds of genes that control height. So it becomes a very, very complex problem. and all genes are related to each other, right? So you do a gene knockout, or you add another gene, you might be able to probably adjust height a little bit, but then that might come at a cost, right? Some other function might get affected. So I don't think that designer babies are what in typical sense what designer baby word is used for, like a superhuman kind of a baby, is going to be common anytime soon. I think so. A scientist in China, he recently edited germ cells to make those babies resistant to HIV infection, and there was a lot of criticism in the CRISPR field for that scientist, because we don't really understand right now that when we are doing this gene editing, what can be the side effects of it. So as I said, that I am using it to understand the biology of viral infections better, or understand how cancer happens better, right? But we don't want to do something which we don't fully understand. And it's also an ethical question, right? So which not just scientists, the whole society has to answer. Do we really want to do this? But I personally think we are not there right now.
Saili is asking, can these modified T cells used for treating cancer harm the human body once they clear out the tumor cells?
Not really. We haven't seen any evidence for it so far. And the first girl who was treated with this, I think she was under 10 years when she was detected with cancer. And now she is a teenager. She's 17 or 18 years old, and she's running half marathons and full marathons. And she's doing very well. And so because here what we are doing is we are taking a specific blood type, a specific cell type out of the body, adding a specific function to it and putting it back. There is a possibility that it can go wrong. There's a possibility that what the changes you are making that makes that itself cancerous. But these things are tested very extensively in the clinical trials to avoid any such things. But there's a possibility that they can harm as well. But the kind of CAR T cell therapy is going on right now, that's very, very effective.
Richa is asking, sir, by this present technique, is it possible to mutate stem cells in humans or fetus of a human? Do these result in drastic change in the fetus so that in future it can become resistant to various viruses?
It's possible to, as I said, it's possible to edit germ cells. And then once you edit those germ cells, then you can that can be used for IVF or having the next generation. But I don't think that that's advisable, and I don't think any of the major groups who can do this in the world are interested in doing any of this right now, because you don't know how the long-term effects of a gene, right? You don't want to the genes we have got, they are evolved after millions of years of evolution, so you don't want to touch something before you understand it properly and pass it to the next generation, right? So I think it's technically possible, but one thing is that we don't know exactly how it's going to turn out, so it's not being used.
There are some CRISPR kits. What are your thoughts on the kit, and what is the future of CRISPR gene editing?
Yeah, so I guess Anushka is asking about if you search for gene hackers or something, there is people who are coming up with, oh, you can do gene editing at home, do it yourself, CRISPR gene editing kits and all. Those are like very basic childish kits, I would say, that basically they give you, for example, they will provide you a bacterial strain and some guide RNAs, and so you mix a couple of things at home, and then you can basically change some things in the bacteria so that you can see it, color is changed or something, those sort of things. But that's just like for fun, I think. And a future of CRISPR gene editing, I think it's going to get easier and easier to do these kind of things, and which will put us in a very different situation ethically and morally. What are the things we want to do and what are the things we don't want to do? I think it's going to be, the gene editing is going to become very mainstream.
Okay, sir, can we use CRISPR to cure Klinefelter's syndrome?
Klinefelter syndrome, I'm not sure what's that, but I think if it's for all type of genetic disorders, we have a tool now that can be used to try and find treatment for those, whatever kind of genetic disorder is, whether it's basically a neurological disorder or cardiac disorder, any kind of disorder.
Okay, we still have questions streaming in. Sorry, sir.
No worries. I'm happy to answer all the questions.
Where in India is CRISPR-Cas9 editing done?
So CRISPR-Cas9 editing, research-wise, I know it is being done at IISc. There is a lab which recently started, and a friend of friend actually started a lab where they do CRISPR gene editing to study different biological processes, and it's at IISc. And then apart from that, I know that no one is using CAR T-cell therapy to treat cancer in India so far. Yeah, and I feel sad about it. I hope, either, me or one of you, we will at some point of time start using CRISPR-Cas gene editing to treat cancer in India. I know Biocon is interested in this, and they are developing CRISPR-based method to treat cancer, like making CAR T cells to treat cancer in India. But I think we are lagging a little bit behind the rest of the world in using CRISPR-Cas9 to study biology and to find treatment for new diseases in India.
True, sir. How do you develop various methods for successful experiments? Are there any standard protocols already given for the same?
Very good question. It's like, I'm sure you must have been taught scientific method in your college, where you think of first thing is to think about a problem, right? A problem which you think is worth solving, and as a problem which we think is worth studying, and then you start you start breaking down that problem into smaller, simpler parts, and then you think about what is it, that part that you have technology, you have tools to actually solve it. And then you think of experiments, right? Controls, what are the controls experiments you can do. And then you have to also think about what resources you have available, right? You can't do an experiment for which you don't have the right kind of machines or reagents. And then protocols, as far as the protocols are concerned, the way you learn about a particular field and protocols is that you go online and you go to PubMed and you search for research articles on that particular topic. That's where you start. You start reading about that topic. You start reading actual research articles, not the textbooks. You go and read the research in that field. Then you understand what is known and what is not known. But you will also understand how they are doing those experiments. There will be details of those experiments, how those experiments are done. So you will get some parts of it from there. But if you're developing something completely new, right, you have to use those parts to develop something new. For example, this HIV guide RNA virus, hybrid virus that I made, no one has done that before. And we had this idea, if we can just put the whole CRISPR machinery into the virus, then when you infect cells with the virus, you can get the gene editing at the same time. So it makes your life very easy to do experiments. So we had this thought, but then we had to try different things. We were not sure where in the virus we want to put this machinery, where should we put it so that it doesn't affect viral infectivity. Virus still is healthy and works properly. So you learn from others' protocols and you evolve your protocols and your experiments as you do the research.
We have some of the very few similar questions. Naveen is asking how this technique can be used for treatment of diabetes and heart disease. And also we have cerebral palsy also. We have very similar questions.
Yeah. So let me just give a general answer for all these disease-related questions. You can do two things, right? One thing is you can use CRISPR-Cas9 gene editing to understand the disease, right? You can basically take patient samples. You can study those samples with gene editing to figure out what are the proteins which are proteins for which the protein level is increased in the cell or decreased in the cell. What is going to one thing you can do is understand the biology or pathogenesis of the disease. And another thing you can do is you can actually go in and do gene therapy, gene editing to treat those diseases. And it's a very new technology. You saw that mainly started in 2012, right? So very, very new technology, and people are trying it for all kinds of diseases, and starting with very simple diseases which are easier to treat, like single gene mutations, those type of diseases. But you can, the sky is the limit, and I'm sure some of you will be using these methods in the future to find treatment for diseases.
We have a question from Nandana, but I'm thinking you sort of did answer this. There are any ethical concerns when changing human genome sequences, and will there be any harm if CRISPR-edited genes are engrafted in humans?
There are a lot of ethical concerns. It's a field in itself, and I would suggest you to read some of the latest books by Jennifer Doudna, the Nobel laureate from 2020, and she had discussed this in great detail. You can imagine, right, that you are tinkering with the genetic. If you're thinking of tinkering with the genetic composition, then it's going to have a lot of ethical concerns, and it's challenging both for scientists and policymakers to figure out what's right and what's wrong. And I think that's why the general public also needs to be aware of all the ethical concerns and need to get involved. I strongly recommend The Code Breaker by Jennifer Doudna and one of her recent books also.
Yes, we do have another question, but it's not sort of related. It's asking, is PAM region region present in human genome?
Yeah, it is. It is a lot everywhere, because PAM sequence is nothing but it's for Cas9, it's NNG, NGG. So basically, so you have any base at N position and G and G. So wherever you have, that's a PAM sequence, and so it's present a lot in human genome. So you can design a guide RNA, which is a sequence which is just in front of the PAM region. And then you can target anything which is near the PAM. And that's how you can target the human genes, because there are PAM regions. PAM regions are essential for Cas9 to target DNA. And because just 3 base pair region, right? So you'll have it just stochastically everywhere in the human genome.
Yes, I think we are done with the questions. I don't think anything there is one question, but you have sort of given general answer to that question. So not go through that again. Anybody else still want to unmute and ask directly a question?
Hello. Yes, ma'am, can I?
Yeah, sure. So,
yeah. So, very good morning, sir. So I had a doubt related. I was the one to ask. I'm the Vanshi Sharma, and I was the one to ask about the designer babies concept. So basically, what I was sort of aiming for my question to reach was, there are few people who have who have a chance of, who have a greater chance than normal to pass on, their genes to the children, and familial diseases. And if both the parents are sort of got the disease and they are, giving it to the child, so there, can this designer babies be really helpful? And it will be obviously helpful. And the thing is that why is it not given that much of a consideration than it should? Because we have the tool in our hands, and it's yeah.
No, you can finish your question.
No, I have a lot to say, so you can sort of answer to this.
Okay, so I got your point. It's a very nice question. It's the reason for that is that I didn't talk about the off-target effects of CRISPR-Cas9. So it's very, very specifically cuts as a position where you target it. But in rare circumstances, it also make cuts at other places. So first concern is that non-specific targeting of DNA. You're trying to cut something at one place, but you basically making a change at an unintended change at some other place, and that resulting in cancer or something. You knock out a proto-oncogene or you hit something else. So that's one concern, actually going in directly editing into human cells for this purpose. Especially in germ lines, right? Because that's going to be a new human being, and that person is going to pass their genes to the next generation, right? And so that's one concern, that we do not understand this technology fully right now. And when you don't understand something fully, it should be worth the risk, right? And what's worth the risk and what's not worth the risk. So when you say that if a particular person has a significant probability of passing a disease gene to their children, it's still a probability, right? It's not, you can calculate the probability and you can figure out, okay, there is chances of them having a kid with beta thalassemia or sickle cell anemia, but this is the probability. And then when the kid gets the disease, right, and then there is a chance the kid might get it or might not get it, right? So, but proactively editing something which is high risk without actually seeing that problem is going to happen is, I think, is not worth it. It's more high risk than benefit. So you look at risk to benefit ratio. And especially because there are unintended side. So one gene can be having many effects, many functions. Initially, we used to think that one gene has one function. Then we started thinking that one gene can have many functions. So and then we started thinking traits can be polygenic. Now we think some things can be omnigenic, like everything is connected with each other. So it's very complex problem. And I think we are not there yet where we start playing with this in actual germ cells. We need to basically understand this much better and figure out what are the problems which actually need an intervention, what are the problems which doesn't need an intervention. I'll give you an example. For example, sickle cell anemia, right? Sickle cell anemia affects your RBCs, their capacity to carry oxygen. But it also, gives you advantage against malarial parasite infection, right? So there is a cost benefit to everything. And I think technology is not there yet as well. So this is the thing. I think as we get better and better in doing this, we might start thinking about specific disorders where this is needed and where we should not do it. And especially, I think that if there is a disorder that you can treat in an adult individual without touching their germline, that's probably better, because then you don't pass those changes to the next generation, because you don't know how they're going to be combined with the other partner and how that's going to affect the future.
Thank you very much for that answer, sir. Sir, also, I also do not agree to this being forwarded, the concept of design babies, which is, deleting or editing a gene. Because I follow blogs and, I follow tech talks of Paul Knopfler. He's also done PhD from the University of California. And he is strongly a person who disagrees with the concept of designer babies. But sir, when it comes to some diseases, like as you rightly answered my question, but it still, it gives me that thing. Some people can't be, they really want a child and it's not possible for them to. And there are people who are like extremely lavish and they just want it for the looks, which I completely disagree with. So what about the diseases? What about HIV?
Yeah, so for example, I'll give you an example of what that scientist in China did, and it was why he was so much criticized. What he did was he edited a gene in the germ cells to make those kids kind of resistant to HIV, when it was not required, because he said that their father was HIV positive. That's why I'm editing the genes in these kids so that they don't get HIV. Now we have very simple procedures where you can wash the sperm cells in such a way that there is no chance that an HIV infected father is going to transmit the disease to the next progeny, because it wasn't needed. There was a very low chance of those kids getting HIV from their father, almost nil. And they still do those genome editing. And when we looked at the data of the genomic editing, we found out that he actually didn't even look properly that whether the editing happened exactly at the place where he intended to, and not at any other place, or was there non-specific editing as well? And which makes it scary, right? You are trying to treat something which doesn't need treatment, because there is very low probability that kid is going to get HIV from his father. But there is high possibility that your edit goes wrong and you get cancer because of this editing, right? So that's why it's highly unethical right now to do such things. First thing is you should have a problem in mind which really need to be solved with this, because as I said, like for example, certain kind of blindness, you can treat it when it develops, and or when it's developing, you can treat it at that point of time, directly injecting the gene therapy into the eye. So you don't need to do gene editing germ cells for that. And I would say again, if you're interested in this topic, read Jennifer Doudna's latest books. She goes in detail. She has chapters on it, discussing the ethical aspects of it and what are the pros and cons. It's a very strong case. I understand, and that's why we're doing it, right? We are trying to study diseases using gene editing, and treat diseases using gene editing, treat cancer using gene editing. But we're trying to do it in a responsible way, because we understand that we don't understand this technology fully. And when you don't understand something fully, you need to really be very careful while using it.
Okay, we have one last question from Himani. Which way can we come up with effective treatment for HIV? Block and lock or shock and kill?
Very, very nice question. So different people have different opinions. Some people think that shock and kill is better because what you do is, so there are two things. Cure can be a functional cure where the virus is still in your body, but it's basically, it's not able to infect more cells anymore. It's just, just silent. Or you can have an actual cure, real cure, a traditional real cure, which is like there is no virus in the body at all anymore. People believe that it's not possible to achieve a proper cure, like traditional cure for HIV. It's going to be always hidden in some tissue somewhere in brain or here and there. But you can get a functional cure, and people think that for functional cure, probably block and lock is better because if you can use drugs that can just block the virus in there for so a drug or an injection which you take once in 6 months, and the virus is just blocked in there, so that you don't have to take daily medication. Whereas some other people think that shock and kill might be better because you shock the cells, you shock the virus out of latency, and then kill it with antiretrovirus. Other people say that when you are reactivating HIV virus and killing it with antiretroviral, you might reactivate other viruses. Like, so in our human genomes, during the course of evolution, many viruses got integrated, and they are in our genome permanently. They are integrated, and so there might be side effects of doing this. That's why more people are inclined towards block and lock right now. But I think both of these approaches have potential in them, and we don't know. So we are the we might find out soon. So as I said, we are the first ones to actually find genes that can block and lock or shock and kill. And we are taking this work into HIV patients now. So we'll figure out which one is more potential right now. No one has done this work. No one was able to do this work before in the past because the technology was not there. So we will, I hope in next 1 year or so, we'll figure out basically whether block and lock is better or shock and kill is better.
Yes, sir. One last question. I think it will be from me. You did explain about the screening method where you studied the HIV latency and you found genes which were responsible for, the latency. So how much time does it take for for a project such as this in such a scale and in such an interest to complete? Like, how much efforts does it take to do this?
It can be completely unpredictable. So that's one thing about research, right? That no one has done it before. You are asking a new question. You are doing a new thing, right? No one has done this experiment before. No one has tried these techniques before. So things can fail. You might have a plan, but that might not work. So for example, when I started developing this technology, my idea was that we should be able to delete all 20,000 human genes, but the method was not efficient enough. So I could delete only a few hundred genes at once. So I went with a few hundred genes first, and then I thought, okay, let me figure out most interesting genes. So I had to, which I think might be involved by, other studies or, by rational thinking, and tried, this method, optimized it. But with time, we were able to, with years of work, we were able to optimize it such a way that now we can do a genome-wide thing. So the results I was showing today, some of the genes we had identified, those were from initial few hundred gene deletions. But now we are doing it like all 20,000, and that's a dream, right? Look at everything possible. Don't go into like one pathway. Okay, this pathway might be involved. Just be unbiased. Just say that any of the genes can be involved. So sometimes this is completely unpredictable. They can take any number of years, and that's what research is all about, I think.
Yes, correct. Thank you so much. I guess we don't have any more questions. I guess no, we don't have any more questions.
I would like to. I think most of the listeners here are students, so I just would like to add one thing for everyone here, that when I was in school, how I decided to become a scientist, and how, any of you, if you are interested, how you can be. Just a couple of lines. So when I was in my school, I used to think about that. Okay, I want to find out a treatment for cancer or for like these HIV disorder things which are not, for which we have no solution yet. That was the thing which was driving me. I studied in a Hindi medium school, in a government school, and so I was not sure. So when I finished my bachelor's, I wasn't sure. I was giving all these entrance exams for AIIMS, IITs, and integrate for masters and integrated PhD, NCBS, IISc. And I used to think that probably I might not be able to crack IISc and NCBS because these are the TIFR, because they're top institutions in the country, and because I studied in a government school, my language skills are not good, and but then I was able to do it. So whatever family background, all those things, it didn't matter, because I had really interest in it, and I was studying it well, and I was prepared for those interviews and for those exams. So I would say that you can also do it. And I hope we get many scientists from this group in the near future. And if any of you need any career advice at some point of time, I'm happy to help.
So sweet. Thank you so much, sir. I think it's time I handle back the spotlight to Rohini ma'am, and she has some vote of thanks for you. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Shri. It gives me an immense pleasure to propose a vote of thanks on behalf of the organizing team of Department of Microbiology and Biotechnology of Patkar Verde College to all those who made this webinar a resounding one. Firstly, I would like to thank Dr. Kishore Rangnekar, President of Chikitsak Samuha, Dr. Kiran Mangaonkar, Vice President, Dr. Gurunath Pandit, Joint Secretary, Dr. Mala Tharkar, CEO, for your immense support and encouragement for organizing an international webinar. I would like to thank our principal, Dr. Shrikant V. Sawant, for gracing the international webinar, Biofacet, CRISPR Gene Editing in Virus Research. Thank you, sir, for the interesting and thoughtful speech which gave beautiful opening to this webinar. I would extend a big thank you to our speaker, Dr. Ujjwal Rathore, sir, for not only sparing time, but also for enlightening all of us on the topic of the webinar. I would like to express profound gratitude to our college chief coordinator, Ms. Ruchita Dalvi, and co-coordinator, Ms. Anupama Towar and Neha Kolako, for their moral support and guidance. We are also grateful to our sponsoring organization, RUSA. This event wouldn't have been successful without the constant support from our staff members and wouldn't have run smoothly without the technical team. Last but not the least, thanking the wonderful participants who have turned up in such great number from all over the globe and for their active participation throughout the webinar. Feedback link will be provided, posted in the chat box. Students, participants, kindly fill it. You will receive certificate within a week's time. Once again, thank you all for your cooperation.